In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna tells us these immortal words: I am the source of everything. From me all creation emerges. Realizing this great truth, the wise, awe-stricken, adore me. Out of pure compassion, I, the Divine One who dwells in all, set a light in their hearts, the blazing lamp of wisdom, which banishes their darkness of ignorance. Whatever being is endowed with power, prosperity, or glory, know that endowment itself to be only a spark of my effulgence. I, the unchanging and everlasting, permeate and sustain the entire cosmos with but a fragment of my essential being. God is the source of everything. From God, all creation emerges. And how many times a day, how many times every hour have we perhaps forgotten to live fully in that truth? Friends of mine once, they invited their parents to Disneyland, and they were on one of these rides where there's a boats that go on the water, and they said, you know, Dad, you would always drive the family car. You know, we think you should sit behind the steering wheel. And so he said, fine, and they were started off. And then his wife started saying, Johnny, look up there, that's amazing. And he said, don't bother me now, I can't look. Can't you see I'm steering the boat? And then we pointed out to him in the water that there was this rail, this track, that was guiding all the boats, that the steering wheel didn't do anything at all. And when we forget that this track of God is guiding our boat, we panic and we think, I'm the one responsible. I'm the one steering the boat of my life, of my family, of my job. And the COVID virus has turned that way of thinking completely upside down, that we are not in control. And is there any hard evidence that this situation will change quickly or soon? And why not have the mental attitude of asking ourselves, you know, if things don't change radically in any way for the next year from now, for the next 2 years, can I accept that calmly? And can I make plans accordingly? And otherwise, what's the alternative? The alternative, when we think only of myself, of my body, and we can't change the things in the world around us, if we keep on going in that direction, we feel angry, we are afraid, we want to blame someone else. We keep on going, we're attracted to people who tell us that we've been wronged, that, You know, our country, our religion, our family is threatened, it's in danger, and we have to protect ourselves. And so we close in, we contract in on ourselves. But when we loosen the grip of ego, when we see God truly as the source of everything, this demands that we expand our awareness, expand our sympathies. And success comes not from our own creation, but when we cooperate with God's will for us. Jesus said once to his disciples, he said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I remain in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done to you." When we consciously try to live in that divine consciousness, that higher awareness, when we serve that awareness, when we serve God, He will take care of our needs. Miracles happen when we maintain that contact. There's many such stories of disciples of Yogananda Ji in the new path. One monk, they were doing some construction. He was climbing a ladder with a big load of cement on his shoulder. And he slipped. And not only did he start to fall back, but the whole ladder started to fall backwards. And he thought of the Guru. He chanted Om. Somehow, that ladder righted itself and went back towards the building. Another monk, one day, in a big truck, he was driving down from the ashram, which was on a high hill, and he was just coming to a hairpin turn when the brakes went out, and he would have gone straight over that cliff. And he said, "Master, is this what you want?" And somehow the truck with the brakes didn't work, but somehow it slowed down to a stop, and he could safely pull over. When Yogananda Ji himself, when he was buying the ashram on top of the hill, he was just about to sign the document, the agreement, and he said his hand froze. And then a little while later, another agent came in and offered it to him for a much lower price. But he had to make the payment all at once. And hours remained from the deadline, and he lacked $5,000. And then he saw in vision one of his students, and he called her. And she said that, just the other day, someone paid back a loan, and I wasn't expecting it at all. It was for $5,000, and she gladly gave it for that cause. And we have limitless resources, limitless source of energy that we draw on when we are in contact with the divine. And we need only to draw on it for unselfish motives. A friend of mine was a mother with a baby, and she seemed to have endless amounts of energy. And all day long she would take care of her baby's needs, whatever it was. And she never ran out of energy. And someone asked her how she could do it day after day. And she looked puzzled a little bit. And then she said, "Oh, I see. You think that the baby is different from me. I see. In my mind, it's like we're both sort of the same being. His needs are my needs. And so there's no extra energy to take care of him. And this mother selflessly caring for her baby, in turn, the baby, God and the baby, gives back to her with trust, with love. To Mother Teresa, she was not serving the poor. She wasn't serving someone outside of herself. She was serving her own guru and God. And so even our thoughts are not our own. They all belong to this greater reality, this greater source of everything. And we can choose to think on a certain level of, tune in to a certain level of thinking. Swamiji tells the story of when he was a young monk, and he fell into a bad mood. And he introspected for a moment, and he said, "Am I happy? No. Then let's change the circumstances. Let's change our level of consciousness." And he went into meditation. And 5 minutes of concentration was all it took for those negative thoughts to vanish, and those negative thoughts never came back. Our job on the spiritual path is to do this. It is to overcome the ego, the likes, the dislikes, the bad moods. Overcome the thought that I am anything different than from God. And we gradually realize that we're part of that divine consciousness. At Ananda village in the first years there, Nitai started a little school for the little children. At first in a little chicken coop, but then gradually they were able to build a small building with many volunteers, and the building was finished, ready to use, but they needed an inspection from the fire inspector. And so one day he came out, he looked at everything, and he said, "You know, the building is fine. The problem is you're a half mile on this dirt road. You need a wide paved road to connect you to the main road, and then you can operate." And that was fine, but that was just absolutely impossible. There was no money possible for such a huge project. And then the inspector also said, "I'll come back in a month and I'll see what progress you've made." And so the day came, a month later, the government car pulled up, and then it was another man who came out. And he said, "Oh, the other inspector, he left his job. I'm the new inspector." And he said, No, you don't need a road. That's impractical out here in the country. You do need one thing, however. Do you have a whistle? He said, because with a whistle, if there's a fire, you can blow the whistle, and then your neighbors will know that you need help. And Nitai said that for years afterwards, he wore around his neck a whistle to remind him that this was not his work, not his school, not his life, but that Divine Mother was in charge of all of these things, and he simply had to let go. God is divine, and we are the branches. And the more we live in that reality, the more everything will work out for the best. Thank you.
Good morning. I saw this week a deep field transmission or photograph from the Hubble telescope. And I sent it on to a few people. It was on YouTube also. And it was showing galaxies that had been formed, galaxies that looked just like ours, that had been formed like 5 billion years ago. And the man narrating the video said it took 5 billion years for this light to reach the telescope. So we're looking back in time 5 billion years when we're looking at a picture of this galaxy that looked very much like our own galaxy. And then he looked further back into this three-dimensional deep field vision photograph that Hubble transmitted back to the labs. And there was 2 separate sort of star formations, star constellations that had not yet connected into a perfect galaxy, elliptical or a disc-shaped galaxy, which we're used to seeing. And he said this was from 9 billion years ago, and that these 2 star constellations were just about to form into a single galaxy. And then he goes further back into the picture, and he shows us just this little red dot and says, this was earlier than that. This is almost 13 billion years ago when there's just an energy field. I don't know, it was a fiery star or something. It had not even started to gain a star constellation yet. It was much earlier in the universe. And I see things like this from Hubble, and I think we cannot even begin to comprehend what eternity is, because that was 13 billion years ago, 13 billion light years away. That's how far it was, and that's how long ago that it took that light to transmit to Hubble. So when we think of eternity and we think of what is infinity, and I look at these telescopes, it just helps me understand that, God could only be the source of such a vast, infinite, eternal creation. And actually, every time I look up at the stars, I'm just reminded of eternity and infinity. And I'm reminded that God is the source of everything. There was in Swami Kriyananda's Festival of Light, at some point he says, the forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies, revolving on the tides of space, had but this for its design, the birth of life. And the birth of life to go through dim corridors of waking consciousness, to emerge at last into infinite light, into perfect joy. That's soul evolution, and that's also the path that each of us is taking from dim corridors of awareness to wake up into perfect joy. The yogic teachings tell us that in order for creation to manifest, God had to take a small portion of himself and vibrate it into manifesting into creation. So there's this duality, there's this Dvaita, this vibration of Om that manifested itself into everything. But that is why we have day and night. That's why we have sorrow and happiness. That's why we have goodness and evil. And someone asked Master one time, does evil really exist? And he said, you have to have this outward pulling force away from the source of God in order to have that duality to keep creation in manifestation. So you have to have that outward source, outward flowing source that Yogananda called Satan. And then they said, well, why? Why did God create evil? And he also said, without this outward pulling force, without the darkness, how could we appreciate the light? Without evil, how could we appreciate goodness? And so we think of, I just have to think for a second. We think of God as the source of everything. And we know it in our consciousness, in our intellect. We understand that God is the source of everything. And yet, how practical is that for us in our daily lives? Is that our experience in our daily lives? Because probably for 99% of the people, or 99% of us, through lifetimes and lifetimes, we've been looking for our security, for our stimulation and enjoyment, for our happiness outside of ourselves. And so suddenly, with the virus, with the lockdown, if we're used to looking outside for all of our security and happiness, then suddenly our desires are being thwarted. Suddenly our likes and dislikes are coming to the surface. We can really see them. And maybe, as Keshava said, our emotions are starting to flare a bit. If we're used to looking out and now we can't go out, suddenly we're looking in the mirror face to face. All the plans that we had for our children, for our family, for our lives, the plans aren't going according to plan. And also, that's the analogy, the story that Keshava talked about, holding on to the driver's wheel. You know, Divine Mother has its own plan, has her own plan. And so just like an apple seed has within it the potential to become an apple tree, with time, with care, it has the potentiality to become an apple tree. Just as us, when we're born, as a baby, we have the potential to become a fully grown, mature human. But what does it take? It takes growth. It takes learning experiences. It takes sometimes disappointments. It takes pain, painful growing experiences. Think of your own childhood, growing up. Did we have any pain growing up? Did we have any disappointments? To become an adult, we must go through that process. And each of us has the potential to become an enlightened master, just like our gurus. We have that potential. But it's not going to come without disappointments. It's not going to come without growing experiences, without some growing pains, without difficulties. And the jiva, separate from God, identified with the body, identified with matter, is going to have to go through some difficult times in order to remember truly that it is a part of all that is, that its reality is infinite spirit. We are not matter, we are spirit. How are we going to get there without going through painful experiences, without going through growing pangs? So God, of course, is the source of everything. And He's also the source of Maya. He's also the source of good and evil. He's the source of all our ups and downs in life. And He's also the source of every lesson that is drawn to ourselves in order to help us change our awareness from being a body to being an infinite, eternal soul on a soul journey into eternity, into infinity. Because how else also is Divine Mother supposed to manifest progress of the yugas on this planet without some upheaval and some change? Our Guru told us that we are in now Dwapara Yuga, emerging into Dwapara Yuga from Kali Yuga. Sri Yukteswar did calculations and saw that there was a mistake way back, and we are not in this infinitely long term of Kali Yuga. We are now entering Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy. And look around you, doesn't it seem so? But in order to emerge from a dark age into an age of energy and light, we're going to have to get rid of fixed forms that are no longer working, this attachment to matter. Look what's happened in the world in the last 4 months. Have we started to transition into more and more energy an overcoming of time and space, just in our Zoom meditations together, just in our Zoom meetings together. We're overcoming time and space, and we're together as one through energy, through the light of the camera. How can we move into a higher age without somehow breaking down the darker ages that are holding us back, that are trying to cling to forms that no longer serve us? We have to cling to the source of all that is. Nayaswami Asha gave the example one time of an advancing army. And that advancing army has to always be connected to its source back at the base headquarters. The commander is giving its orders. The base operations are sending fuel ahead to all the tanks and vehicles that are moving forward. There's food supplies. There's medical supplies. All of this source from base operations is maintaining the army at the front that is fighting the battle. And what happens if that source of supply gets cut? Suddenly, the men fighting the battle don't have food, the tanks don't have fuel. The troops may start to forget what it is I'm doing out here. I no longer have a connection with my commander, and the battle will be very, very hard to fight. It's the same with us. If we don't stay connected to that source of the divine all the time, how are we going to be able to fight the battle that we know we need to fight, that the soul needs to fight in order to achieve oneness in God? This battle between identification of matter and ego and our little separate self, and that identification with infinity, with eternity, with the soul's true essence. So we need to stay connected to that source always. And how do we stay connected to that source? Let's ask ourselves, when do I feel most connected to source, to God, to Divine Mother? And what times of my life am I feeling most cut off from that source? Look at that very carefully, introspect. Because when we're more in tune with God, with the gurus, the gurus' consciousness is one with God. When we're in tune with them, when we follow their teachings, when we meditate, when we get still, when we experience that peace within, we are connected to Source. So let's make it a priority. Let's make changes in our lives. We also need to move into the new age. What helps us connect with Source? It becomes our priority. Learning the lessons that God has given us through this extraordinary series of events and interesting time. It would be too bad if we were not able to move into the new age. As the masters are guiding us, they come to teach us how to move with grace, how to receive that grace to help us move into the new age. And they show us how to become instruments. They're connected to that source. They channel that source to us. And as we receive that wisdom from them, that love, that peace, that stillness, that joy that they are shining to us all the time, it becomes our job to be instruments of that source to others. And that's how we assist Divine Mother in moving from a darker age into an age of energy and an age of light. It is our Dharma. We are Krishna's soldiers. We have to be like Krishna. We're our Master's disciples. It's our job to do what they have asked us to do, be their instruments in this world. And I'll just end with the prayer that Swamiji, I'll end with two things. One, just to keep us connected to Source, in the Festival of Light, if you remember, there's the little bird, and the little bird is trying to fly on its own, and it becomes very weak and tired and scared. And the night skies say to him, "Behold, your very strength to fly has never been your own. Look to the source of all power if you would conquer fear and weakness." And the little bird asked, "Where can I find that source?" And they answered, "Seek it in the farthest depths of being, in your own self." Joy to you.